joining us now in studio is Crew and the executive director of the Wildfire Project, Joshua Kahn. Joshua, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, I love this show so much. I'm just so grateful to be here every time.
I'm honored.
Yeah,
I'm honored.
Yeah.
We've been working together for a little while, and we've done stuff that has been for the patrons on what does radical climate action look like in today's world, as an example, or how do you actually build a campaign. But will you start by, telling us your story, how you got to be where you are, who you are? I know that's a big one.
Yeah. That what? Is this close enough? All right.
Okay, yeah, just make sure you keep in range of it. There
Great.
you go.
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I grew up in Connecticut,
right?
About an hour from here, about an hour from the studio. And in Connecticut, in middle school, I got bullied and all of that and felt pretty alienated and found subculture. I found punk rock and reggae, and that led me to a kind of anti-establishment, anti-authoritarian orientation. And quickly found myself at a pretty young age in activist organizations. And that was the political milieu that was kind of the global justice movement. Mm-hmm. So I was like reading Chomsky and all of that, but I really began to learn my politics just by doing the work. And so when I was about 14, I joined a group called Anti-Racist Action. And we were focused on just confronting Nazis, basically, in the streets. And in Connecticut, there was actually a lot of neo-Nazi organizing in the mid and late 90s. And we saw ourselves, it was kind of like fringe subcultural left fighting the fringe subcultural right in a way. But actually, okay, I'll give an example of how that politicized me. In the late 90s, the leading white supremacist in the country, his name was Matthew Hale. Mm-hmm. He was the leader of a group called the World Church of the Creator, which was the biggest neo-Nazi organization in the country at the time.
So tempted to make a joke about Matt's family, but I won't. Sorry. Yes.
Is that?
That's it's one of my theme. Well, it's totally inaccurate. It's just complete slander. That Matt's from Dakota.
Any generalization about the Midwest can find its way.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. I mean, they weren't even trying to not be a cult. It's like the cultiest name you can imagine. And right. So anyway, that dude was speaking at a public library in Wallingford, Connecticut, and Wallingford was known as or at least we called it the Ku Klux Klan capital of the North. And so we talked about how I don't even know if this is true, but that they forced kids to go to school on Martin Luther King Day. It was like very institutionally, explicitly old school racist in Wallingford. And so we went to go protest, and our message was clear. We were like, yeah, we believe in free speech. You have a right to be here, and we have a right to say that we don't want you in our community too. And we got there, and there was just this phalanx of riot cops, totally outsized for the event. And anytime someone who looked like a neo-Nazi skinhead tried to come into the public library, they would kind of open the floodgates and let them in through the drawbridge. And anytime someone looked like a dirty punk rocker, which we very much looked like, they would keep us out from the public library that we had a right to be at also. And in that moment, we were just raging at the cops, and the fact that we saw these riot police, that wasn't a surprise to us. We had these anarcho politics. And my politics at that time, I didn't know how to draw distinctions. So it was the riot cops were the same as the Democrats, were the same as the Republicans, were the same as mom and dad.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, I actually love my parents very much. I didn't rebel against them, but you know what I mean. Yeah. And so it took me a minute to realize, whoa, half these cops are black, and they don't want to be here. And I started talking to them and asked them what it was like to be protecting people who would kill them in a dark alley if they had the chance.
Right.
And that at my ripe age of 14 put me on a path of thinking systemically. I was like, oh, my issue isn't with the cops for their individual, because I just hated cops individually.
Right.
But that it was an
David
institution.
hates cops individually, so you should listen, David. It's a little maturation here, Griscom.
Yeah, I grew up. And so anyway, I started to see, okay, there's an institution that's designed to protect property and protect the status quo. And in this town, that's a really extreme status quo. And it turned out those cops were actually bussed in from outside the community.
Jesus Christ.
And so I began to build a level of discernment in my politics, and which I continued to refine just by figuring out how to campaign. So I was in high school, and also in high school, I started a Gay-Straight Alliance, and it might sound kind of tame in these days, but it was like real confrontational.
Dude, I remember in the 90s, like even in the late 90s, and I mean, look, I grew up in Western Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. This is well ahead of the national curve on gay rights specifically, and yeah, but absolutely things like the Gay-Straight Alliance could lead to fights and. People
shocked.
Getting screamed. I mean, no, you're right to point that out. It might sound like the most, put down on your Instagram profile thing today, but that was highly conflictual.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so we had so we tried to start the club. We checked all the boxes of the requirements to start a student organization, and they wouldn't let us form. And I almost got suspended for putting up flyers. And the principal called me in and was like, well, we can't let you do this because it's so offensive. And she was like, she was like, we wouldn't let a KKK club put up flyers either, because that's also offensive. So you get it, right?
The Gay-Straight Alliance to the Klan?
Yeah, equally offensive. And so, we had a choice at that moment of just being pissed off at the principal and trying to go after her, right? Mm-hmm. But we were able to build a strategic orientation to thinking about power, and we're like, what's really going on here? Is the issue that the principal is a homophobe? Or is it something else? And it was that the community was. Right. And we made an assessment that it was actually the PTA, that all these mothers in this Connecticut suburb who were terrified of their kids going to school and having gay stuff there,
right.
And that they were putting pressure on the principal. Right. And so we were like, cool, follow the pressure. And so we did a campaign shaming the PTA and circulated notes from their meetings and did stuff in the newspaper.
That's awesome.
And they freaked out and were exposed and backed off. And then suddenly the principal didn't care. Right. And so right. it was an experience of learning about target setting, of figuring out, you don't win campaigns by just raging at the most obvious target, but figuring out where's your leverage and what are the secondary targets you can go for that allow you to get what you want, and being clear about what you want. What we wanted was to have a safe space for us to meet, not to just be righteously enraged at the principal, right. Which we could have gone that way. So anyway, I should jump past high school because we have a lot of other stuff to talk about. But so by the time I got to college, it was the Iraq War in 2003. We did all of so I got politicized in the anti-war movement, which didn't feel like a movement at first. And we shut down our campus and joined with other students, and that led me to form an organization that was kind of short-lived. It was around for about 4 years, called the New SDS. It was modeled after the old Students for a Democratic Society. We could do a whole illicit history on that. There's tons of lessons about it. But the quick version of it is it exploded because there was no vehicle for student anti-war sentiment, and so we had 6,000 members and 600 chapters in half a year, right. And we were an explicitly left anti-capitalist organization. So that, and for us, that was it was amazing. It crumbled under its own weight because we didn't have clear goals or vision, and we got stuck on process, and that would be part of the illicit history that we
right.
did. So there's movement building lessons there. But so then I've spent the last 14 years of my life in climate justice, and that's looked like a lot of things. I've been beaten up on the banks for a long time for their funding of pipeline infrastructure and mountaintop removal coal mining. That work brought me into alignment with indigenous sovereignty movements, and yep. A lot of my deepest political education came from learning from Native struggles in the U.S. and learning how to be in solidarity. And that is what broadened kind of my cosmology of how I see the world and see human rights, racial and economic justice, and the environment as intrinsically interconnected. And that brought me on a pathway of nonviolent direct action and being a direct action trainer for the last 13 years with a group called the Ruckus Society and being a facilitator of coalitions. It brought me to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which connected me to this like moment that we called the youth climate movement, where we were just all over the world, and I got to learn from activists in the global south and in a variety of places. And I'll wrap up with the activist bio by, I guess, two more things. One is that one of the biggest campaigns that I was a lead organizer and coordinator for was the Keystone XL campaign. Mm-hmm. And in that campaign, there's tons of lessons, but one that comes to mind right now is picking strategies that somehow feel at least a little bit to scale commensurate with the crisis.
Right.
And the organizing logic, there's like a Saul Alinsky kind of style of organizing logic that is about a ladder of engagement. So it's like the way you organize people is by first, having an event and getting them to come to the event. And then maybe they'll sign up on your list. And then once they're on your list, they'll get your emails. And then maybe they'll come be a participant in the meeting. And then maybe you can get them to facilitate a meeting. And then maybe they'll come to an action, and you kind of ramp it up from there. And we had a different philosophy for that campaign that was like, we need to make exponential jumps and strong asks of people. And that the reason why people aren't getting engaged in climate change is that if you're told, the terrible thing about Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth movie was it was like, the world's ending, so recycle, take shorter showers, and change your light bulbs. Right. And it's obvious that isn't going to do it, right? And so with the Keystone campaign, it started off not as a campaign, but as a sort of flashpoint action. We did 12 days of civil disobedience at the White House and had people kind of relentlessly getting arrested at the White House. And part of the success of that action was it was a doorway for people. Almost all of those people had never taken action before in their lives. And so their first action was to risk arrest. And it brought them, and
that's powerful though. That's kind of like deep into the pool sort of stuff.
Yeah, and it was, we were hedging our bets that people were waiting for an opportunity that felt meaningful. Mm-hmm. And that was an intervention, not to veer too far off course, but it was an intervention on the culture of environmental nonprofits at the time, which was very timid, very cautious, very poor partners with environmental justice and racial justice groups, very poor partners with indigenous
people
groups.
Have a sense, but can you just, not to interrupt you, but can you define, I think it's really important, there's, the kind of I always juxtapose, Jerry Brown versus Donald Trump. Donald Trump wants to, accelerate the destruction of the planet because he's an idiot and more deeply probably has a death urge. And if I have to die, when shouldn't everybody else? Mm-hmm. And then Jerry Brown has some really good policy ideas, and he kind of gets the scale of the crisis, and there's no justice in that plan. There's fracking in poor communities. There's no sense of how this connects with inequality, how this connects with race. So can you define like environmental justice specifically as outside of that kind of traditional sort of tepid environmentalism or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah. There's a lot of ways to define it. I mean, it's a movement that came out of the 80s, primarily from people of color who were looking at the human impacts of environment. So like, for example, people who live near refineries and have higher rates of asthma, people whose water is poisoned, as well as indigenous communities where, most of our electricity comes from extraction on native reservations, where there's uranium mining and where there's coal mining. And so it's based on the concept of in this context, a word called like frontline people. So people who are dealing first and worst with the impacts of environmental degradation, which are poor people and people of color in this country, and then globally in the global south, and certainly indigenous people. And so the movement first emerged about working on those issues. And within the social movement landscape, it was really seen actually as a branch of racial justice more than it was as a branch of the environmental movement. There was like a huge divide. Over time, it's come to, there's the concept climate justice, which is sort of extending that into seeing this globally scaled problem. And it's based in a bunch of principles, and a lot of those principles come from indigenous sovereignty movements. A lot of those principles come from, environmental movements in the global south are always led by poor people. They're not this like middle class kind of we're trying to save owls thing. And so it's a lot influenced greatly by there's like a stream into the movement from those politics. And it's also based on the idea that the people who are hit first and worst by the problem both have greater insight on what the problem is because they're experiencing it directly, and also have real solutions because they live lives that are outside of the normative way of being. So that was the movement I was schooled in, but it was multi-sectoral, and I always had an approach and an orientation from that of getting beyond the issue silos and supporting movements for liberation in an integrated way. And I guess I'll just wrap up the bio prologue. That led me to be a facilitator. I have an organization called the Wildfire Project now. We can talk about it. But it led me, I want to be like honest and maybe a little vulnerable, is like I had a wall. And, I had experienced the typical burnout that people experience all the time. That's not what I'm talking about. I had been sprinting for, over like 15 years, leading from my head. I was like super analytical, like always about strategy. And I really like lost myself as an artist. I lost access to like my body's wisdom and my heart's wisdom and my spirit's wisdom, which all of these movements are actually talking about. And I had been spending years like hanging out with climate scientists in their silent despair, or like with Native friends who have like I have a friend who has like 16 family members who've died of rare cancers that only exist on their reservation because of oil extraction. Like the level of despair that I was feeling, primarily because the environmental movement like didn't have a shit together and wasn't picking strategies that had any marker that had to about the reality of the crisis. They were not to scale our strategies. And so I was like navigating that, and I had lost myself in like, as an activist or organizer, I was like defining myself based not on like who I am, but on what I do. And I've been navigating chronic illness my whole life, and I had Lyme disease for 10 years.
Jesus.
And I hit a wall, and I spent 3 years completely bedridden.
Jesus.
And I couldn't do anything. And I was experiencing dementia. I didn't think I would ever get better again. I forgot what it felt like to be able to do anything. And that was medicine for me, man. It was like I had lost spirit in all of that. And I had an experience where like Western medicine had completely failed me. And a lot of the communities in which I had worked invited me to come sit and pray in a different way and come back into myself. And it felt like, not to sound too out there, but like, like the universe or whatever was saying like, yo, dude, you've been out of balance for like a really long time. I've been trying to show you all these signs to like get back into balance and walk differently, and you don't know how to fucking listen. And so I'm going to give you something so debilitating that it's going to force you to have to transform from the inside out in order to survive. And it was the best gift I ever got in my life. And now I do my work in such a different way. And it oriented me towards grounding and hope around climate change, because I feel like, again, like not everyone resonates with this language. That's fine if it's not for you, but it feels like, the earth is saying to us, y'all humans have been out of right relationship to each other for a really long ass time, especially the last 500 years. That's put you out of right relationship to me. And I'm going to send you something so expansive and debilitating that's climate change that's going to force y'all to have to change everything in order to make it through. And that's what you need to evolve as a species. And so I found that spiritual anchor.
You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.